Hello everybody, my name is Mike Geig, and thank you for tuning in to our lesson today, which is not so much a lesson so much as it is a scripting primer and a question and answer session to kind of help people get into scripting who's never maybe tried it before, because it can be very daunting for new people trying to figure this stuff out. There's a lot of resources on the internet. Some of them are good, some of them not so much. So it can be hard to figure out what's worthwhile and whatnot. So we figured we'd do this little session here today. Before I get started, as always, if you have any questions, comments, suggestions, anything like that, feel free to hang out with us on Twitter, at Unity3D, at Mike Geig, which is me, at Wool Goldstone, and at the Ant Ranch. Now, real quick, just so you all know, the intended purpose of this is very question and answer oriented. So I am gonna to lecture a bit on scripting, but I'm going to be going. I hear a sound. What is that? I have an echo going on somewhere. I'm sorry. Let me turn these off. Anyway, sorry about that. I lost my train of thought. So I'm going to go a bit slower and read through the chat room. We have 160 some people on here chatting, so I'm going to read through any questions that you might have and try to answer those as we go along. And I generally try to do that, but I'm going to make an extra effort to do that this time. So again, we're going to go a little bit slower even than we've gone in the past, because I really do want to catch as many of your questions as possible. There's tons of information available, like I said, on the internet. What makes this different is that I'm here right now to answer your questions. So that's really going to be what I'm focusing on. So some of the questions, can I attach the scripts we're going to write here today to the website, and what language will I be using and things like that. I will be using C#, but I'm not going to be doing anything you can't just easily do in JavaScript or Unity script, if that's what you want to call it. I'm not going to be able to put the scripts that we write here today on the website, only because we haven't yet established a mechanism for doing that. So that's in the works. The live site is still fairly new, so I don't have a way to share stuff with you. Well, that's maybe not true. Maybe I may share the scripts with you. Actually, a thought just came to mind. Maybe I can do that. Whatever. If I can offer them, I will. Though the scripts we're going to be writing are not really going to be scripts so much as I'm going to be teaching scripting, which is a subtle difference that we're going to be looking at. So I will do my best to get this stuff to you, but worst case scenario, you can just watch the video and write them out, because this recording will be available on our site. So yeah. Speaking of which, if you're new to all this, if you go to unity3d.com/learn, there's a ton of materials there, and it's a great place to find these recorded sessions. All of my previous live sessions are on there as well as a ton of other videos and resources and forums and stuff like that for learning and becoming better at this stuff. Cool. All right. So, you know what? Actually, while I'm talking about it, let me just show you. Let me pull this down here. So if we go to unity3d.com/learn, you guys get to see all the comics I read. They popped up in Firefox there. You come to our Learn site here, which is unity3d.com/learn. We have our tutorials, documentation, live training, resources, premium support. The live training tab is here. If you're watching, this is probably where you went. I will be adding more. I just haven't done it yet, but we got a lot planned, so don't worry about that. If you come to tutorials, you can go to the beginning editor, beginning graphics, beginning scripting. We also have intermediate scripting, and so on and so forth. So there are plenty of resources available to you to continue learning. Plenty of official resources. There's a ton of great resources in existence. I'm only calling these out because these are made by Unity, for Unity, guaranteed to work sort of thing. So yeah, anyway, so like I said, today is going to be kind of a primer, but if you want to continue your education, the Learn site is a great way to do that. Okay, So a lot of questions have been asked about what type of questions. I'd like to stick with scripting questions, but if you have a real quick, easy question about something else, feel free to let me know, and I'm more than happy to answer that. But I am pretty much trying to stick to scripting. So if you have questions about like 4.3 and stuff like that, I'm really not going to field that because those are beyond the realm. Another question: how do we access and edit terrain? I had a couple videos on terrain, a couple live sessions on terrain, so just go check the archives, and they'll be there, so you can check that out. All right, so before we even start scripting, right? One of the questions that always comes up is what language should we use, right? And that's a real common one. I use C#, so a lot of people use JavaScript. A very small fraction uses Boo. I don't know too many people that use Boo. I don't know Boo personally. I don't know anything really about it. But I will say this, that whatever language you use, it doesn't really matter, right? We can use multiple languages even in the same project, in the same scene, you know, multiple scripts of different languages on the same game object. It doesn't really matter. So stick to the one you're comfortable with, right? If you're comfortable with JavaScript, do JavaScript. If you're comfortable with C#, use C#. I prefer C#. I think C# meshes better with the way Unity does things, with the object-natured approach to game development that Unity has. So I use C#. It just makes a lot of sense to me. Some people are veterans, you know, 20, 30, 40 years of JavaScript programming, you know, so they're just going to stick with JavaScript. It doesn't really matter. If you're new, I'd say C#. To me, it's a better language for new people, but if you have a preference, just use that preference. All right. So the question was, how do we edit the terrain in script? That's really kind of beyond the scope of this presentation, but feel free to message me on Twitter later, and I can link you up some stuff. But okay, so now let's actually talk about scripting. So we talked kind of about the languages. I use C#, whatever. So at the very basic level, all right, we're going to talk about how scripting works in Unity. So in Unity, everything is this kind of game object driven, right? I have a camera, I create terrain, I have a player, I have a controller, I have lights, I have a particle system, and we have these game objects, right? And these game objects are generally fairly static, right? You place them somewhere, they have these components on them. Maybe they're emitting particles, maybe they have light, maybe they're, you know, have some texture or material, but they just basically just kind of sit there, right? So any interesting thing we want to do with game objects, we achieve through scripting. And scripting is how we just we program behaviors for this stuff, right? So we program what we want it to do, how we want them to interact, and it can be very overwhelming because there's a lot of stuff that we can do. So let's kind of look at the very basics, and a lot of the stuff I'm going to talk about is going to be just basics of language in general, but then we can apply it to game objects as well. So I'm going to go ahead and create an empty game object, and this is just going to be the game object we're going to mess around with. So I'm going to come to game object, create empty, and it doesn't really matter where it is or what it does. I'll zero it out. I'll put it at the origin there. And this is just going to be our guinea pig object. We're not really going to do anything special with it. But scripts in and of themselves don't work unless we put them on objects, right? So a script, so here I'll show you. I'm going to create a script. Down here in my project view, I always create a folder for scripts. I just think it's better that way. I like to keep stuff organized. So I create a scripts folder. And what I want to do is open that up, and I'm going to create a script. And I do that by right-clicking, going to create, and right here are our scripts. And we can do JavaScript, C# script, Boo script. I'm going to go ahead and just do C# script. All right, fantastic. And I'll call this one, of course, we have to do the programmer standard. I'm going to say hello world. And I'm going to take the space out of it. No spaces in the file names. That would not be good. So hello world. There we go. This is the most basic project or most basic script you'll encounter in any language. It's pretty much the first. Real quick, if I could request everyone in chat who's kind of talking about Unity 4.3 stuff and sprites and 2D, could you not, only because with a lot of traffic and with a lot of chatter, I'm not going to see the questions that pertain to this lesson. Afterwards, we can certainly leave it open, and we can continue chatting and stuff like that. But just for right now, and I'm more than happy to hang out afterwards in the chat and kind of answer some questions too. But just for right now, just to make it easier, I will talk. Yes, this is about basic scripting. One of the questions is about basic. Yeah, it's the scripting basics, primer, and question and answer. We will talk about what a mono behavior is in just a second when I open the script. So I have created a script here called Hello World, and we'll see that the file name is helloworld.cs. It could be .js if you created JavaScript. Is it .boo for boo? I don't know. I've never even. Well, here, let's find out. I've never created a boo script. It is okay. It's .boo. Okay, we'll get rid of that. So we can see that the script appears in our project view, which means it is an asset, which means it has a correlating file in the file system. Now the script itself will not run. It will not do anything until I attach it to a game object. And how I attach it to a game object is real simple. I'm just going to click and drag it, and I can put it on the game object, or I could put it on the game object in the scene, but since it's empty, I can't see it. Or I could drop it into the inspector of that game object. So with the game object selected, I could bring it over here. I could even do add component, scripts, hello world. So there's a lot of different ways to add scripts. I'm just going to click and drag, and it gets added to our game object. Now this script will run. Whenever the scene is started, some specific functions inside this script will run, and we can create our own and do all sorts of wacky stuff. But and we'll get into all that. So the script is now attached to my game object, and we can see in the inspector for the game object, we get a special component. We get a script component. And the script component is called Hello World. And we can see that the script field for that is just our Hello World script. So it's very basic. Our script doesn't do anything right now, and thus it's just a very basic component. All right. All right, so there's that. So let's go ahead, and one more thing is if I click the script, I can get a preview of what's in the script right here in the inspector. So we can see this script is very basic. It's only like maybe 10 lines of code, and it doesn't really do anything yet. So let's go ahead and open it. We can open it by clicking open, or my personal favorite is just double clicking it. And that's going to open Unity's built-in IDE, which is MonoDevelop. One second, let me see if that opened up. Must not have double clicked hard enough. So one of the questions is why when inspecting a script there are some variables that show in the inspector and some that are not shown. That actually has to do with our access modifiers, which we will talk about. So some of those might have been public while others are private, and only public ones appear in the editor or in the inspector. So I'll actually show you that, but that's more than likely why. I don't know what your specific situation is. Let's see. Oop, my phone's making a lot of noise. I gotta turn that off. Okay, so we get MonoDevelop here. Now, I just updated to Unity 4.3, so I have the new MonoDevelop, and I'm still figuring it out. They've moved some stuff, and they've kind of changed the way it looks. So yeah, so it's a little bit different for me. The syntax is highlighted in different colors than I'm used to, so I might have to figure out where stuff is. What really annoys me is there's no save button in the toolbar, and I'm sure I could add it through here somewhere, but I just haven't played around with it enough. But anyway, so here is MonoDevelop, and MonoDevelop has a few sections we care about. The first is obviously this main window here, and I'm gonna go ahead and make my text bigger for all of you who are watching the video. This main window is our editor window. It's where we type all our code, right? And we can move and expand and stuff like that. But this is just like Notepad or WordPad or any other typing word processor program. Okay. Then we have our Solution Explorer here on the left, and we can see that we have our scripts folder that I created and the Hello World script. There are no other scripts, and so nothing else appears here. Now you can see that I have the project that I've created for doing these Twitch broadcasts is called Twitch, right? And so we can see the different parts of Twitch, the assets of Twitch. I have another one called Workshop, which is where I do my general recording and stuff like that, which is why you see Workshop there. But we're not messing around with that because that's something entirely different. So one of the quick questions here, what do I have to do to go to school and learn how to code games and everything? The answer is absolutely nothing. You don't have to go to school for this. A lot of people didn't go to school for this. School is great for people who are not self-learners, but if you're a self-learner, you absolutely don't need school. I'm a college professor, and so me saying that's probably like sacrilege, but it's true. You just, if it's something you want to do, just start doing it, right? Attending these is a great way to start. Learning, making games in your off time is absolutely the best way to do it. So you don't have to go to school. School is cool, but you absolutely don't have to do it. All right. So let's talk about this script here. So I've kind of talked about MonoDevelop a little bit. There's a bunch of buttons and stuff up here that is really kind of beyond what we need right now. We're just going to talk about the very basics. So let's go section by section. The first is we have our using section at the very top. And I'm going to kind of just go over this real quickly. Basically, this is telling the script exactly which namespaces it wants to use. Long story short, we're going to leave this alone, all right? In the future, if we need to use a specific namespace, we'll say it and we'll change this, but just kind of ignore that for now. It basically means that, hey, we're using the Unity engine and we're using the built-in collections. And if you're using a JavaScript, you won't see a using section. JavaScript does that stuff inherently, and we don't need to necessarily do anything special with it. So that's that section. Next we have this, our class declaration. Everything in Unity is wrapped up into classes. So with C#, our classes are overt. We can see our classes. In JavaScript, that's handled for us. So even though we don't see the classes, we think, oh, we're not in classes. We are. JavaScript, it just handles that inherently behind the scenes, which is nice because then you don't need to do it, but can also be kind of annoying if you need to do some work with it, right? So there's pros and cons to both. We can see that my class name is Hello World, which is exactly what I named my file in Unity. And that's very important. They have to have the same name. If they don't have the same name, it's not going to work. So we see I named it Hello World here, and it says Hello World here. And that's very important. We also see that it's public and a class. Those are just keywords. Keywords are highlighted in this color, and they just help define or specify some information. All right. So this is a public class, which means things outside of this file can use it, which is good. That's what we want. It is also a class. It has to be a class. That's required. And then we have Hello World is the name of our script, and this colon here is basically saying that this script is inheriting. Now, I'm not going to get into inheritance, but that just basically means that it gets a bunch of stuff, right? It's kind of like if you have a family member that leaves a bunch of stuff for you, right? You inherited all that stuff, right? And that's kind of what we're saying here. We're inheriting. We're inheriting from MonoBehavior. MonoBehavior is the base class for all of our components. So we saw that when we added the script to that object, it got turned into a component, and that's because it comes from MonoBehavior. Anything that doesn't come from MonoBehavior can't be put on a game object, right? So everything that's going on a game object, basically all the scripts we're going to write, except for a few exceptions, will inherit from MonoBehavior, and so we just sort of leave that the way it is. That's why it's there by default, so we can just sort of ignore that. And then we have two built-in functions. And one second, I'm trying to read questions. So one of the questions, what are collections? Collections are collections. So if I have a bag of apples, I have a collection of apples. So if I have like 100 integers, but I want to store them in a single variable collection, it's a collection, right? We're not really going to get into those, but they're kind of like arrays or lists or vectors, or they're just different ways of holding a lot of data in a small amount of space. Basically, that's what a collection is. Let's see here. How do you see static variables in the inspector? I have to make another variable in code to represent the static variable. There must be another way. I did a video on static variables, and for the life of me, I'm drawing a blank right now. I don't know that you can. Maybe you can. I don't remember. Static variables belong to the class and not any instance of the class, so they would not be on that game object to be shared. It's kind of beyond the scope of this. I don't remember. Hit me up on Twitter later, and I will remember for you, and I promise I will help you out with that. Okay, so another question. This is a good one here. I learned Unity with Unity script, then switched to C#. Now both are being used in my project. Is it important to convert my old ones from Unity script to C#? Not at all. Nope. They can both be used in your scene, your project. Will not matter. That's completely fine. It's not a problem. Yeah. So with the static stuff, like I said, hit me up on Twitter later. I'll give you an answer. We're live now, so of course I'm drawing a blank. It's Monday and we're live, so of course I can't remember stuff. But yeah, just message me later. I'll help you out. Okay. So real quick here too, while I'm talking about this. If you are a fan of VB or if you've learned with VB, you're not going to be familiar with these brackets, right? We got brackets and we got semicolons. All right, both JavaScript and C# and not Boo. I don't really know the specifics of Boo, but I know they don't do this. Do not, or they use the brackets. So JavaScript and C# uses these brackets, and they end all statements with a semicolon, right? So like this line is a statement, ends with a semicolon. This is a class declaration. It's not a statement. Doesn't end with a semicolon, but it denotes a block. So we have these brackets. Basically, when you use a semicolon and where you use brackets, it's just something that you just sort of memorize, right? There's no real hard and fast rule other than brackets denote blocks and semicolons end statements, and that's the rule. And so knowing what's a block and what's a statement can be a little tricky. All right, that's just one of those things that I can't really tell you every single possible situation right here in this presentation. So it's just one of those things that just watch me, kind of go along with me, and you should hopefully start seeing a pattern emerge, and it won't be a problem. All right. So, okay, so we have, another thing here too that's kind of important is we have this line right here. This is a special line of code. When you see a code line that begins with 2 forward slashes in both C# and JavaScript, that's what's called a comment. And so that line of code is meant for us to read, not the computer. All right, so I can put anything I want in comments. This is a comment. Right, and the computer won't see that. It's completely ignored by the parser and the compiler, and instead it's a human readable line of code. It's useful for sending messages to people and stuff like that. Not particularly for the computer itself. All right, and so we get a couple of those comments to start. Now internally we have 2 functions, and a function is basically just like a block unit of reusable code. All right, we have 2 functions right here. We have the start function and we have the update function. Now the start function gets called every time the scene starts or an object is initialized. Okay, so if I create a new object and it has a script on it, the start method of that script will be called. Update will be called every single frame. So if your game is looping at, I don't know, 120 frames a minute, we're going to call update 120 times, or 120 frames a second. We're going to call update 120 times a second. One of the questions, I thought scripts were interpreted languages. Why is there a compiler for a script? I used it. I apologize. I incorrectly just say compiler. Because for years of writing compiled language, it's a mistake. I'm sorry. My apologies. I promise I won't do it again. I will probably do it again. I just say compiler. It's not the correct term. It is interpreted. Now there is they do get partially compiled. If my Unity foo is correct, and I'm trying to remember all the behind the scenes workings, I believe they're compiled into an intermediate language of sorts behind the scenes, and then they're interpreted in real time to be faster. I'm just gonna say compiler. Don't pay any attention to me. Just ignore me. Okay, so we have this start function, we have this update function. And before we get into a lot of the nitty-gritty stuff, I want to show you a relevant example. And so we've created our Hello World script. So obviously, the very first thing we need to do is create our Hello World output. That's just kind of what we do, right? It's as a programmer, every time you learn a new language, the very first thing you do is create Hello World. I don't know why, it's just what we do. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tab in here. Tabbing is very important in programming. And I'm going to say print Hello World. And it's not super important for you to understand what I'm doing here right now, so much as just to see a working script. And then I'll kind of talk about what we're doing there. So I'm going to go ahead and hit Control S to save, Command S on the Mac, and it's just all we can see is going to happen here is any object that has the script attached, when it's initialized, the start method will be called, and we will print hello world to our console. So let's see that work. I'm just going to drag that off screen here. And if we click this now in the inspector, we can see our hello world there. We note that this is attached to our game object. So I'm just going to go ahead and run the scene, and then I will stop the scene. If I go over to the console view, I see hello world. So our script does in fact work. It's completely fine. Now, and I see that there are a couple questions. I will get to those in just a second. So that is our start. We can see that it ran one time. And as a matter of fact, if I wanted to, let me clear this. I could put this script on multiple objects. So I'm going to put it on the camera too. So now it's on the camera and on our game object. And I'll run the scene. I'll go to console, and I see that it's called twice. All right. Once from our game object and once from our main camera, right? So if I had 100 things and this was on 100 of them, we'd see this written 100 times, all right? Let me take this off the camera now. So scripts are great because they're reusable as well, so I can put them on a bunch of different things. Okay, so back into our script. Let's take this hello world line. Let's put that in our update instead, all right? So remember what I said about update and how often that's called. So now I'm going to go ahead and run my scene. And I'll stop my scene, and all of a sudden we've got hello world written a bunch of times. Alright, and that's because we put it in the update. And the update happens every single frame. So every frame, which at the slowest we might want 60 times a second, maybe 30 times a second if we're really doing a lot of processing. But realistically, this is going to do faster than that. And it's printing hello world to the console. So let me clear that there. Alright, so that's kind of our start and our update, and we're going to use the start and update to kind of handle most of our stuff. Now let me read through here real quick. We've got some questions, so I need to check that out. Is there a major advantage to using a hybrid between JavaScript and C# when building code, or can one code language be used without any major disadvantages? Additionally, what situations would one language be used over the other? So there are no major advantages to using one over the other, except if you're working on a team, you get to leverage the experience of the team. So if you've got one person who's really good at JavaScript and another person who's really good at C#, the ability to use both means that both can work at maximum efficiency. That's pretty much your only benefit, right? I do everything in C#, and sometimes I work in teams where everything is done in C#, and it's not really a problem, you know. There are certain language-specific situations where one language is better than the other one. However, they're obscure. They're weird little situations where you really don't use all that much. I think C# does a broader, does a better job of handling a broader situations. But that's just me. That's the language I use for beginners. So yeah, there's no real advantage or disadvantage, except, I don't know, I like C#, so that's the background I came from, so that's what I'm sticking to. But no real advantages or disadvantages to speak of. Yes, you can use both languages in the same project. Yes, JavaScripts and C# scripts can be on the same object. You just can't put JavaScript and C# script in the same script. They have to be one script, one language, another script, another language. Otherwise, they work completely fine together. I'm checking my other chat here. I'm just reading my questions. What programming language do I use, Word or Unity? I'm not sure if that was a joke or not. But no, it's between C# and JavaScript and Boo. The Word and Unity are two different programs, so I'm not really entirely certain. I hope that was a joke and I didn't actually just laugh at you. My apologies if I did. This, my MonoDevelopment looks like this because I got a new MonoDevelop with Unity 4.3, so if you update, you'll have a new MonoDevelop as well. If you have a cross-platform game, should you create different scripts for each platform? Nope. The scripts are not tied to a platform at all. So, yeah, it's not a problem. For the guy that keeps spamming questions about Unity 4.3 sprites, please stop. I don't want to have to kick you out, but I will, because it's very difficult for me to read all the chat and answer questions and lecture at the same time, so please don't spam. So what about movement with keyboard versus touch? So you're talking about cross-platform. Some have keyboard input, some have touch, like phones. You can have the same script on both and just use statements to determine which platform you're currently on. You don't want to get into a habit of constantly having to switch your scripts out. That's actually one of the great reasons we use axes with our input, which I'm really digressing now, but axes allow us to just be like, hey, if it's on this axis, do this, or that axis, do that. And then in our player settings, we just say the keyboard is this axis, and the touchscreen is also this axis, so it doesn't really matter which device we're using. Yeah. So yeah, anyway. Okay. Yep, you got it. Okay, sorry about that. So let's get back to this particular lesson now. So this is our Hello World script. It's basic. It doesn't do anything cool, but it is a functioning script. And we can see the difference between start and update. And we can see that we have these brackets, and any code I want to happen during the start goes in between these brackets. And any code I want to happen every frame goes between these brackets. If you put code outside of the brackets, it's not going to function the way you want. And if you put code outside of the class, like up here, again, it's not going to function the way you want. So it's very important to be mindful of where you're putting your code, all right? Otherwise, things are going to do things not the way you want, all right? Yeah, Drew, if you want to message me on Twitter later, I'm more than happy to help you out a little bit more there. But yeah, there's a lot we can do with that. C# and C++ are not the same thing at all. They're very, very different. C# is basically like a mixture of C++ and Java with garbage collection and all that stuff. But anyway, I'm digressing again. No C# or no C++ in Unity. It's C# is our scripting language. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and close this here. We can save and close. That's fine. So let's talk about, so that was kind of our Hello World example. Let's talk about, we're going to start with the very basic building blocks. We're going to start with variables. Variables is kind of where we all start. Real quick, Johnny, I think is how you pronounce your name, John, whatever, said, tell me more about void. Void basically means nothing, and that's the long and the short of it. So if you have the word void, you are basically saying nothing. And the void doesn't mean no value. Void means nothing, all right? So if you had a bucket that was empty, it would not be void, it would be null. If you didn't have a bucket, it would be void. So that'll make more sense when we talk about that stuff. Yeah, and this video will be uploaded. It may be uploaded today, maybe tomorrow, but it will be uploaded, yes. All right. So let's create a new script. I'm going to go create, I'm going to go C# script. I'm going to call this one variable script. I apologize for my super loud keyboard. I like mechanical keyboards, but they are very loud. So, all right. We have, oh, Hello World open, it was still open. So here's our variable script. And our variable script, we can see, follows the exact same format, only now the name is variable script. We still have our start and our update. I'm not going to use the update, so I'm just going to get rid of it. I like to declutter my files. There's probably a way that I can tell it how to start my templates here, but this is the way I like to do it. I like to inline my brackets. I like to get rid of the comments. In my mind, that makes it cleaner. But yeah, you can kind of do whatever you'd like. Okay, so let's talk about variables. And so variables are basically these bucket containers of data. If you've ever done algebra, where you're like, you know, x plus 2 equals 5, solve for x, and in that case x is 3. X itself is a variable, right? It's holding some number that we don't know what it is. And variables are basically kind of like that, only with programming, variables can hold a lot more than just numbers. They can hold words and objects and all sorts of things. But at their root, they all basically function the same way. They're all a bucket that has some value, and that's it. I mean, that's the mystery and the magic to it. Is basically that. So if I wanted to create a variable to contain some integer data, so in integers whole numbers. Oh yeah, sorry about that. I forgot with the new script everything was real tiny. So there we go. Zoom in there. So one of the questions, something about quotation marks. It's probably with your computer. I don't know. I don't know why you can't use quotation marks. They work just fine for me. But yep, sorry about that. So if I want to create some integer, all right, variable to hold some data. I can do that very simply in C# and in JavaScript, and possibly Boo. I don't know Boo. So I'm actually just gonna stop talking about Boo, because you don't need me to continually say I don't know what it's like in Boo. Just assume that if you have a question about Boo, I do not have an answer for you, and I apologize. Then you could probably find some source online that can help you with that. But in C# and JavaScript, if I want to create an integer, I start with the keyword int. And, well, in JavaScript, JavaScript we declare variables a little bit different. But in C#, I'll say int, which means whatever I'm about to do is an integer. And I'm going to give it some name. And I can name it whatever I want. I can name it x, right? I can name it my int. I can name it cool story, bro. I can name it whatever I want, right? Banana, whatever. Doesn't really matter. I give it whatever name I want. There's only a couple rules. The first rule is that you cannot start with a letter. So I could do x7, which is fine, but I couldn't do 7x. That's no good. Can't start with a letter. I can't use special characters like any of these in a variable name. That's not going to work. And I also cannot have spaces in it. So not like my x. So single words, don't start with letters, don't have special characters, and you're good to go. But I could do something like _x. That's an allowed special character. I could do x, or I could do my num, right? Whatever. What you're going to see me do often is I believe it's called Pascal case. It might be camel case. I don't remember the name of it. Where I always start with a lowercase, and then every other word is an uppercase, and they're all together just like that. Yeah, that's just kind of the way I do that. It's personal preference. Everyone's going to have their own style, whatever. Far be it from me to tell you how to do it. It's whatever works for you. It doesn't really matter. So in this case, I'm going to say int 5, and I'm going to put a semicolon. This is a statement. The statement is I'm declaring a variable x that is an integer. All right, I'm going to put a semicolon at that. Now, I'm going to show you what this looks like in JavaScript, even though it's obviously not going to work because I'm in a C# script. But in JavaScript, I would say var x int, just like that. Saying, hey, I'm creating a variable, its name is x, its type is integer. So that's how that looks in JavaScript. Okay, yeah. So in case you were wondering how different JavaScript is in C#, almost everything is the same. It's just few syntactical differences, and it's really, that's kind of the same. I don't think I actually use true camel case because I uppercase my functions. Camel casing lowercase is even functions. That's why I think it's Pascal case and not camel case. But it's been a long time since I was in computer science class, and I can't remember the names, and frankly it doesn't really matter, so who cares? So what we have here, just a little bit of terminology for you, is this is a variable declaration. This is where we declare a variable. So if you get an error, right, because you're going to get a ton of errors, you always will, I still do all the time, you might get an error someday that says variable x has not been declared, all right? That doesn't mean that you're using x inappropriately. It means that you never did this part. You never declared it. You never created it. You never said, I have a variable named x, it is an integer. So if you ever get an error message that says something hasn't been declared, you're missing this step right here. This is your declaration, and that's an important term because it's important to know for debugging and that. It's an important term to know. All right. One of the questions, I thought variables were untyped in JS. They're not untyped. JS is loosely typed, which means you can change your types and do all sorts of stuff like that. Yeah. So anyway, that's a slight difference there. And so we have our int x like this. This is our declaration. Now, we also have something called our initialization. Initialization is where we give a variable a value. So now I can say x equals 5. So at this point, for any lines that follow this, x will hold the value of 5. All right. So this is our declaration. This is our initialization. So you might get an error message that says, warning, you're using x without initializing it. Well, that means you declared it, but you never gave it a value. All right, and if you're trying to use something that requires it to have a value and it doesn't have a value, because the value is not 0, the value is not anything, the value is nothing, right? You got to give it some value. I think in C# it'll automatically assign a value to like numerics. but I always initialize just in case, right? Because who knows, maybe they'll change it in the future, or maybe I'm wrong on that, and then all of a sudden your scripts won't work, and it'll just be a complete pain in the butt. So just be wary of that. Okay, one of the questions here: if you create an integer, do you have to call it different names in different scripts? I'm paraphrasing a bit. Call it different names in different scripts. So I have int x here, but if I create another script, can I also use int x? And the answer is yes. This int x, one of the answers was it's scoped to the class, but it's not even scoped to the class. It's scoped to this very specific function. What that means is the x in here. Let me go ahead and put my update function back. I can also do int x here, right? And they're two different variables completely. They just happen to be called x, right? Because they're owned by this block of code. This one's owned by this block of code. I actually planned on talking about blocking later, but here it popped up now. So yeah. So anyway. So yeah, this name is owned by this function, and we'll talk about scoping later because we can scope things to the class by putting it above the function, but in the class, then it belongs to the class, and so on, so on and so forth. So there's a lot of ways we can do that. So let me nuke this here. Goodbye. So okay, so we have our declaration, we have our initialization. We can also save a step by combining the two and doing something like this. This is our initialization and declaration in the same step. So basically, we have int x equals 5. We're declaring an x variable as an integer, and we are giving it a value of 5. All right. These closed parentheses have to do, one of the questions Shane here asked, why do we have these parentheses? These parentheses are part of a function. All functions have a return type and parentheses. We're not to functions yet, but basically, if we wanted to give this function some values, they would go in here. Start doesn't take any values, so we can't put anything in there. But that's the specific syntax of functions. All right. And so basically, what that enables us to know is anytime you see parentheses, you know we're using a function. I can be like, hey, out of context, right? I can still go, hey, that's a function. I know that's a function. Just because parentheses pretty much always mean functions. So that's what those parentheses are for. Don't worry about them right now, but they basically denote functions, and it's part of the parameter set. All right. Yep, as someone in chat basically just stated. Okay, so here we have the initialization and declaration of an integer variable. We could also do this in JavaScript by doing something like this, and that's how the line looks in JavaScript. For x is an integer, and it equals 5. Okay, easy peasy. All right. So integers are not obviously the only type of variables. In math, we basically just use variables for numbers. But integers can only be whole numbers. So if I were to set this to, like, say 5.5, right? And then I were to print this to the console. We printed the console, by the way, by using the word print, and then parentheses. And remember, what do parentheses mean? Parentheses means we're using a function. Parentheses are always functions. So we're saying, hey, print, and we're going to print x. So basically what we're saying is print, and we're going to pass this variable in, say print that, all right? And if I save this, and I run my scene, wait a minute, did I put my game object? Nope. I'm going to remove my hello world component, and I am going to be putting this on here. Interestingly enough, it actually didn't even let me do that. If I go to my console, I get a warning, or I get an error. It's not going to let me run this. And it's because it's saying, hey, 5.5 cannot be put into an integer. Integers have to be whole numbers. I was hoping that it would just allow me to fake it and show me that the output was only 5, but it's not even letting me go that far. It's saying you can't put 5.5 in there. So, yeah. Whoops. Okay. So anyway, so say I wanted a variable that could hold 5.5. Well, I don't want to use an int then. I want to use something called a float. So I might say float y equals 5.5. And that works completely fine. And as a matter of fact, Unity Unity prefers floats for just about everything. Every kind of language has its preferences, like C++ prefers doubles, Unity prefers floats. And so floats are for floating point numbers, which means we can have numbers before and after a decimal place. And with Unity, we have to specify an F afterwards, just to say, hey, this is a float. All right. So yeah, so a float is just a floating point number that can hold, now it's 5.55435. Or if I wanted, oh, here's a good example. Float pi equals 3.14159, right? Floating point number. And I'm going to put the f at the end of it because that's important for floats. That just means, hey, we are using a float. Okay, so sometimes we have those. And so the reason we put the f after a float is because we also have a data type called double. And double, we could also have, say, pi2, and that equals 3.14159 as well. And floats have the f and doubles do not. The big difference, so a lot of people don't know what the difference is between floats. Unity prefers floats, all right? Floats are smaller in size because they are less accurate. What that means, don't think that they're like, oh, I have to use doubles for everything because they're more accurate. Floats are less accurate to, like, I think 20, they're accurate to like 29 or 30 decimal places. So to give you an idea of what that looks like that's still completely accurate in a float, all right? Now, if you're doing like scientific calculations, you would maybe want to use a double because that's accurate to like 300,000 decimal places or something ridiculous like that. I don't remember exactly how many decimal places. But for all intents and purposes, a float will be everything that you need it to be in Unity. Okay, which is why the preference is float in Unity. It's smaller in size, and thus it's more efficient. And it lacks some of the high levels of accuracy, but it really doesn't matter. So doubles are supported in Unity, but we almost never use them. We can, but we just don't, right? Because most of the functions, everything require floats anyway. Let's see here. I'm trying to read through the questions. Do you need an f in the float after JavaScript as well? Yes. Just so Unity knows whether you're talking about a float or a double. It's always a good, even if you don't need it, put it anyway, because it's good discipline to get into, and it just ensures that you know that this is a float and things like that. When and where do you use end? I'm not sure what you're talking about. If you're talking about the keyword end, if you're talking about like end if, which is something that we use a lot in VB. The end is not something we necessarily use in C# or JavaScript. Do floats and doubles have the same minimum maximum value? No. Doubles are much, much bigger than floats. Which is fine, but we don't actually need it, right, most of the time. It's a very rare situation indeed where you will actually need the accuracy or the size of a double in Unity. Mostly the times you'll use that is if you're doing like scientific stuff, and you need really, really big numbers or really, really small numbers, and even then doubles might be too small and you need to go to something even bigger, right? But basically that's what doubles are. I'm kind of spending too much time on that, so I'm going to move on. We also have so we have floats, we have Boolean values, and a Boolean is, okay, so as was explained, end is usually part of another structure like conditionals and loops. End is used in different ways for each of those structures. No, we don't use end in C# or JavaScript. That's VB. So end if, end loop, or end while. We don't use end in C# or VB. This is our end. Brackets. Brackets is our begin and our end. We don't have to use the keyword end. Yeah. Yeah, so basically, as someone pointed out, 3D floats are pretty accurate. So, yep, that's good enough. Okay, so we have these things called booleans, and booleans are for Boolean logic. Booleans can only have one of two values, true or false. And in some languages, they equate to 0 and 1. However, in C# they do not. So in C++, I can actually do math with the word true, and that it works fine. In C# I cannot. And so Boolean logic, I might say bool is alive equals true. Okay, so we have this, I call them flags sometimes, so we can see that the flag is alive is set to true. So whatever this is meant to represent is true. And then I can say, oh, by the way, if you lose 100 health, now is alive equals false, right? Because you've lost 100 health and now you're dead or whatever, right? So that's our Boolean. Boolean can only be true or false. We use them for flags. We use them for state or status. We use them a lot in conditionals and loops, which we will talk about. All right, so that's our Boolean variable. Then we also have char. Char is short for character, and a char is a single character. So char, I'm going to just call it my char, would be something like A. Okay, or B, or 1, or 0, or exclamation mark, or most people don't know this, that's called an octothorpe. Some people call it a hashtag, some people call it a pound sign, but it's actually known as an octothorpe. So there you go. Even if you didn't learn anything about scripting today, you learned what that was called, because I guarantee most of you, or if not all of you, did not know that. Or we can do an asterisk or whatever, right? So we can put some character in there. So char is a single character. And with the char, we use a single quote. Okay? So not double quotes. This will work, but this means something different. Okay? This is not what we want. We want single quotes with chars. Okay? Single quotes, not double quotes. Okay? That is char specific. And then we have the classic string, which stands basically for a string of characters, right? So I might say string. And with this, that's where we put double quotes, and we can have multiple words, multiple letters, and all that stuff in there. So, oh, hello, world, not worlds. We don't want this for aliens or anything like that. Yeah. Oh, someone's making a pun about octothorpes in C#. It's not that good of a pun. I'm not going to repeat it. Sorry. Okay, so what we have here is we have a string of characters, which allows us to put all sorts of stuff in there. I mean, we can have letters, numbers, special characters, whatever. It's fine. It doesn't matter. And so this might be like if I wanted to redo my hello world, I could maybe then just do print my string, and it would print out this string to the screen. And as a matter of fact, I'll show you this work and run it, and we will see hello world appears there. I'm also going to get a whole bunch of warnings. Let's see if they appear. Show me my warnings. Warnings are finicky. Of course, it's not going to show you because I'm trying to make them pop up right now. Let me take focus out of Unity and then bring focus back to Unity. Give me my warnings. Warnings appear in yellow. I'm just going to describe them. And some of the warnings we're going to see is that we have created these variables and we never used them. So it's just warning us, saying, hey, by the way, you created that and you're not using it. So it's just going to warn us. To answer your question, how long is today's session? Today's session is actually only going to be a little bit longer, so I am going to try to cram it as much as possible. I see that we'll probably schedule more of these scripting primers to keep going, but I like to keep these to about an hour. I will hang out afterwards, though, and answer more questions. So can you give an example when using a char would be better than a string besides the space taken up? Is there any other advantage? We might use chars for just like codes, right? So I might just use R for red, right? Or Y for yellow or whatever. They save on space, as you pointed out there. They do save on space, and that's kind of it. You know, it's you know, it's a corner case. It's one of those things. When would I ever use that? I don't know. You'll never use it until you use it, right? I will never use a char until that situation comes up along where I'm like, man, I need a char, right? And so I do that. Another question, can we get to more Unity specific stuff? No. We got to cover this before we can get to Unity specific stuff, or else the Unity specific stuff is not going to make any sense. We got to build a foundation. So like I said, this is very beginner stuff. Hopefully you're not bored, but I'd really like to give us a good foundation. One of the questions, aren't chars used a lot in case statements? Maybe if you build your case statement to use chars. You might build your case statement to use ifs or not ifs, ints or whatever else. So again, it's one of those things that is you only use it when you use it, and otherwise the situation where you might use that doesn't readily come to mind. All right, so then we got chars, we've got strings. There are other variable types. We can even create our own variable types. So int, float, bool, char, string are built in and they turn blue when we type them. But we can make our own. We do not need to use, well, we will eventually need to use the built-in ones they're too useful to not use. But we can create new ones and do whatever we want with that, which means we can basically make some cool stuff. All right. Real quick here, are those strings Unicode? I believe they are Unicode. They might be UTF. I don't remember. I'm sorry. That's more of a trivial question. I'm sure I could find out for you. I can't remember if they're based Unicode or UTF. They might be UTF. I don't remember. I could look that up. But, yeah. Alrighty. So, alright. So let's move on. So we talked a little bit about, what is the difference between print and debug.log? One would use one versus the other. To my knowledge, they do the exact same thing. I think one is just a rewording of the other. I think maybe print just does debug.log behind the scenes. I don't know why that just happened. They do the exact same thing. I don't think there's a difference. I think it's just two ways of doing the same thing. So, yeah, I wouldn't sweat it. I type print because it's shorter. And maybe it was originally debug.log and they added print later because it was shorter. I don't know. I just use print. But they do exactly the same thing with absolutely no difference. So, yeah, until someone was like, by the way, they do something different behind the scenes or whatever. But to my knowledge, they do the exact same thing. All right, and so, right, we can use the debug class to do all sorts of stuff, but debug.log, I believe, just prints. Debug without log, we can do a bunch of other stuff too. Let's see here. So we talked a little bit about scope. So I have int x here, and let me bring back my update function. So I'm going to do void update, and I'm going to do int x here, and it's a different x variable. So we have x here and x here. They're two completely different variables. They do. So one of the things people said, I think debug gets removed at compile time. Print stays. Nope, they both stay. Yeah, like I said, I don't think there's a difference. Anyway, so we have two ints. This works because they're in two different blocks of code. And what we do is we call that scope. And scope effectively means where a variable is useful, right? So here we start a scope. We know we're starting scope because we have brackets, all right? So we can see here that we're creating int x, and then we're able to use it. And when we hit the corresponding end bracket, x is destroyed. Garbage collection comes and cleans it up because we've left the scope of x. And then we come to update and we have our bracket, we start a new scope. This is a completely different x. It doesn't know that x ever even existed. These x's do not know anything about each other. When we hit this bracket, that x is destroyed. All right? So we have two variables of the same name because they're in two completely different blocks. Now, both of these variables are in this block, right? Which is fine because even though they're in two different blocks here, they can't see each other. But there's this block that ties the two together. So if I were to say, create a variable up here, int x equals 20, all of a sudden, these x's cannot be used because it's going to say, hey, there is already a variable named x. And so I'm going to kind of move this out of the way and come back here, and I'm going to wait for there's my warning, by the way. Where it says variable script .x is assigned but never used. I told you that would happen. Is it going to let me do this? Oh, it's going to let me do this. What a scoundrel. That should be causing me problems because I have multiple variables with the same name. Anyway, it does not like it when we have the same variable used over and over. What's more than likely happening is it's just ignoring this declaration part and it's just initializing the same x variable. Okay, so we have an answer. Someone looked into this. According to a Unity Answers post, thank you for Draco for looking this up. Print only works if your class inherits from mono behavior. If it doesn't, you have to use debug.log. So that's the difference. Print works if you use mono behavior. If you use anything other than mono behavior, debug.log. So that's the difference. Thank you for looking that up. I did not know there was a difference. And someone was telling me too that the warning is where that popped up. So I'm not gonna. Let's see if I can get that warning to appear again. Warnings are finicky. Sometimes they appear, sometimes they don't. All right. So thank you for looking that up. I certainly appreciate that. Another question. Why define a variable in an update? Well, maybe I want to use it in the update, right? Maybe I I need to use some variable here for my temporary calculations, and that's why I put it there. Variables, again, you create a variable when you need one, right? If you don't need a variable, don't create it. So there might be something I'm doing in update that requires me to have some variable, like I don't know, maybe I want to update a position, so I've got to store the current position temporarily in a variable so I can modify it and then put it back into the transform, or something like that. Yeah, so basically that's why we'd want to do that. The answer is the lower lower scope variable will get preference. That's not true. This will lead to some weird behaviors. It should be giving me an error, but like I said, this is a new MonoDevelop, Unity 4.3. I don't know why it's not giving me an error, but it really, really should, because this is a really, really not good thing to do in programming. Do not have multiple variables that share scope like this, because this variable shares the scope with these other two variables, because these other two variables are within the same scope as this variable. Because this one and this one, different scopes from each other, right? But this one and this one, same scope. Right, so don't do this. I'm using this as an example. I was really hoping to throw a warning or an error, and it didn't. So definitely don't do that. But this allows us to create our variable x in a higher scope, and now I can use x here without declaring it because it's already been declared right up here. All right. Basically, I can't give enough time to really getting into scope as much as I'd like. So if you're curious about scope, please look it up. There's a ton of videos on it. How about an example that does something other than print? I would love to, but we don't know enough scripting yet to do that. To do anything that does anything, we need to know about conditionals, and we need to know about all our different operators, we need to know about our loops, and I haven't covered any of that stuff yet. And since I can't assume anyone here has that knowledge yet, because this is a very beginner tutorial, I cannot cover that stuff yet. So I kind of have to go in order. So I apologize. I know it's boring for some of you, and I'm sorry, but you're just going to have to deal, because I don't want any beginners to be left out because we got anxious and went too fast. Alright, so we have our scope up here, and I can recreate all this stuff up here, and if I do, then I don't need to declare it down here, and it's shared across all of our functions. So if I want, because one of the problems here is that, let's say I do something like int health equals 100, right? So here I declare my health. Now in update, I might say something along the lines of, ignore my syntax for a second here, because this isn't anything we've covered yet. But if health is less than 100, right? Well, it has no idea what health is, because I created this up here. It doesn't know what health is. Or I could say int y equals health minus 5. What is health? It has no idea what health is, because health is declared up here. It's destroyed when we hit here, so it has no idea there. So if I want health usable in multiple functions in my class, the simple thing to do is to put it at the top. Int health. All right? I don't even have to give it a value there. I can give it a value right here. Int health equals 100. As a matter of fact, that's what our start function's for, initializing things, because it's only called once, and only when something first gets created. So we generally do our initialization there. So now I can use health just fine right here, because it knows what health is. It knows it's declared there, and it knows it was given a value there. All right. So health is then shared. So that's why our scope. That's why we put them at the top so that we can share them across all of our stuff. So there we go. Now, real quick, someone was talking about things that appeared in the inspector and things that didn't. So let's look at this here real quick. I'm going to use print again just because it's the real simple thing to do. But I'm going to go. I'm going to put this in update, even though that's probably going to end up being a mistake. But I'm going to say int x at the top here, and then I'm going to say print x. Okay, and I will save this. And this shouldn't work very well, but I'm going to do this anyway. And so what it's going to do is it's going to do 0, 0, 0, 0, because it by default is just tossing in some value of 0. It has no real value. All right. Okay, so what I can do is, let's say, I mean, having to pop between Unity and scripts all the time is a pain, right? And one of the biggest benefits of using Unity is its visual nature, right? The whole idea is that you don't have to be a great programmer to use Unity to make games, and you should be able to use this visual editor for most of your stuff, and you don't want to be sitting there looking at a bunch of white space writing code. So what I want to do is I want to be able to control this variable x inside my editor. I don't have to keep coming back and forth. Let's say I'm making a game and I want to be like, okay, is this value right? No, that value is not right. Let me come back here and say, okay, equals 2. All right. Is this value right? No, that's not right. Okay, let's come back here. You know, how annoying would that be, right, to have to do that all the time? So what I can do, and what I'm going to do is, well, first off, I'm going to initialize this because it's just a good thing to do. Even though I know it's going to give that a value of 0, I'm going to give it a value of 0. Just a better safe than sorry. It's just a good practice. What I'm going to do is I'm going to call this public. There are two security flags, access modifiers is what we call them, public and private. There's more than that, but the two we're going to use, public and private. By default, everything is private, right? So I don't have to specify private. It'll be private naturally. But if I call it public, it becomes public. And what public means is other scripts can access the stuff in it, and here's the best part, I can come over here to Unity. Let me save this. And if I click on my game object, now all of a sudden I see the variable x with a value of 2 appear in here. Now you might be like, why does it have a value of 2? Because I gave it a value of 0 here. The reason it's 2 in the inspector is because 2 was the last value it had inside the editor, right? So it remembers that and puts it in there. So now check this out. All right, so now I can edit this inside the Unity editor, right? And so I can do that by typing a value in there, or I get these little left and right arrows where I can just drag it, right? So check this out. So I'm going to run my scene, and I'm going to see 45. Now there, and now here. And so I can, while my scene is running, change the variables in my scripts without going back into my script. That's super awesome, all right? So basically that enables us to write our scripts and then put our scripts away and then work in Unity and debug by changing values and tweaking and stuff like that without having any weird issues, right? Without having to constantly go back and forth to my script, which can be really annoying and time consuming to have to do that over and over and over again. So the ability to modify these inside the script is hugely awesome. And so we have that public. I could type private float pi equals 3.14. That's fine, right? I don't have to have private there, but I can. You know, it basically doesn't do anything. And you can see how pi does not appear. All right. However, oh yeah, here's my error. Remember I told you you have to put the F after a float, or else it does not like that. I wasn't lying to you. I promise. So I have to have an F there. But now I'm going to make this public. And save it. And now I will see pi right here. And now I can modify it, right? So again, it's pretty awesome. Public is great for that. There are some security issues that can come around by making everything public, but that's not anything you need to worry about right now. All right, so just know in the future you're not going to make everything public, but for right now, public is your best friend. Okay, and we can worry about all that other stuff later. Okay, so don't get real caught up on that. Okay, so at this point, we definitely didn't get as far as I wanted to get today, but I am going to wrap up because we're hitting the hour mark. Really glad you guys had a lot of questions. That's super important. I see that someone called me out for not having the F. They noticed before I did, so thank you. Maikune, however you pronounce your name. I will do more of these. If these are popular, if you guys like this, please let me know on Twitter. I will do more of these, and we will keep expanding. I really wanted to get to the different operators today, and I actually wanted to get to if statements and loops as well. But you know, sometimes time works against us. So I'm much more happy that you were able to ask questions than us getting super far, because you can get super far watching videos on the internet or reading a textbook. You don't always get the chance to actually talk to someone and ask questions, and that was my major goal. So today we talked about, well, first off, and I'll link it again, the Unity3D Learn, all right, site is awesome. So come here, check out all our videos and stuff like that. Definitely check that out. We talked about the basics of script, how to create scripts. We talked about the inspector. We talked about how we add scripts to game objects, because remember, a script will not run unless it's attached to a game object. You can write the best script in the world, but if you don't attach it to the game object, it will never run, and that's no good. And a lot of times we just create empty game objects just to hold scripts and stuff like that. We talked about how that becomes a component. I will show you guys the Twitter stuff in a second. We talked about MonoDevelop and the new MonoDevelop and what it looks like, very briefly, but we talked about it. Showed you guys Hello World and the basic components of Hello World. And we talked about variables, the different types of variables, declaration versus initialization. Remember those two terms, declaration, initialization, very important terms. Remember those. We talked about ints, floats, booleans, chars, strings. We talked about scope, and we talked about public versus private. Okay, and here's Twitter information. Please contact us, questions, comments, suggestions. I love suggestions. I'm always sitting there like, man, what should I do next? What should I do next? And I'm coming up with a blank. So suggestions, please. And if you've given me a suggestion and you don't see it posted yet, don't think I ignored you. I have a whole list of stuff I want to do behind the scenes. I just have to quit being so lazy and actually post it. So there is stuff coming up. It's just not posted yet. So questions, comments, suggestions. You can reach us at Unity3D, at Mike Geig, which is me, at Will Goldstone, and at the Ant Ranch, and that is a great way to contact us. We're also on Facebook and LinkedIn and Google Plus and all that stuff. So just contact us, let us know what you want, let us know what you're looking for, and you'll be good to go there. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap up now, but I will stay on the chat for a few more minutes here. So if you guys have any questions or anything that doesn't pertain to scripting, right, that you were talking about earlier, I will be more than happy to go over that stuff there. So for all of you who were here for the scripting, thank you very much. Appreciate it. I will get new lessons posted. You can expect another one next week, and we will go from there. So thanks again for watching.